Our final speaker this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Rod Fensham. On behalf of Ms. Isabella Paxton, in her undergraduate studies, Bella developed a passion for Australia's native myrtaceae, which are under threat due to metal rust. She hopes to make positive contributions to their conservation through her research. So Rod's presenting this morning her presentation, Unknown Futures, a little-known species of rainforest Rhodamnia at major risk of extinction. It's my pleasure to welcome Rod.
Good morning. I'm going to start out with a bid for the lamest plant costume. You got me? Queensland bottle tree. But I'm going to morph into the broadleaf bottle tree, which is fat, but not quite as fat. Thanks, Adrian and Paul, for having me on your country, and I look forward to catching up later on. Okay, have I got a device here that'll work? Yep. So the first thing you might want to do in relation to myrtle rust is get to know what it looks like. And it can look like the centre slide when it's active, but it's more likely to look like the left-hand slide, which is the old dead shoots, which can look pretty harmless, but once you get your eye on, you realise it's completely inhibits the capacity of the tree to grow and very often reproduce as well. And the ultimate outcome is you see these dead stags in the forest, sometimes big rainforest trees. And we initiated a project to sort of assess the impact of the disease about 4 or 5 years ago. Most of the work was done by Julian Radford Smith in that photograph, who dashed around the rainforest of the East Coast assessing as many plant populations as he could with a symptomatic assessment of the symptomology. And the outcome was that we erected a list of 16 species that we call Category X, which essentially have very little variation across their populations in terms of their susceptibility, and they're extremely susceptible. Essentially, they can't grow and reproduce anywhere where they occur. Since then, I was talking to Brandon yesterday, and he's got new candidates, so the list is growing since Julian's work. And one of the species that was kind of marginal, we've also got this list called Category Y, which is those species that we should be worried about, but we can't quite say that they can't reproduce anywhere across their range. So Rhodamnia, for example, is a Category Y species, has some variation in its susceptibility. And one of the species that was sort of right on the borderline is actually an undescribed species of Rhodamnia. And so Bella's job was to describe the species as a new species and to reassess the threat of myrtle rust across its range three or 4 years after Julian did it, and more comprehensively than Julian did it. It's a good species. It's got a very clear geographic range. It lives just to the sort of northwest of Gympie in southeast Queensland. It's got a beautiful geographic range, very discrete. And its closest relative is probably Rhodamnia porciovulata, which lives a long way away up in the Whitsundays. And it's Bella's work. When you look at it, there's a number of key differences. Our Rhodamnia is a tree, porciovulata is a shrub. It's got bigger leaves, and it's got these floral characters that are quite different to do with the persistence of the calyx and the hairiness of the fruit. And it's a really beautiful plant, like all Rhodamnias are. And we're proposing to call it Rhodamnia zombii for obvious reasons, because when Bella did the reassessment of the symptomology, there's no populations that are doing well, and they're all severely affected by myrtle rust. And I went on one of the trips and saw a population. It's pretty horrifying to see these dead stags in the rainforest, and especially when they've got that really distinctive bark, like the bottom left, so you can spot them in the forest at some distance. Okay, so what are we going to do about the myrtle rust problem? People have been talking about that this morning. I'm only going to give you one little pitch for what I think is the key thing to do. One thing we need to do is find places to put them, and fortunately Townsville's fairly disease-free, or almost totally disease-free, and there's Brandon, who's in the audience, and he's doing a fabulous job growing myrtle rust susceptible, well, finding them, growing them from cuttings, getting them going in his gardens, and ultimately trying to produce seed, and that's one of the main things I think we should be doing. And Townsville's a great place to do it, a little far away from Brisbane, and we need to set up places closer to home for the subtropics. And so we had a bit of a play with the guava, which we've heard about this morning, one of the most susceptible species. We planted 40 just up the road here in Highfields. You can go and have a look if you want. It's only like 5 kilometres away. And they grew really well, but they do get affected by the rust. And there's a neighbour in one of those houses. I knocked on her door and gave her some fungicide and said, if you put these on the trees, they might not look so ratty. And she said she's going to do it, but I haven't been to check the progress. 50 kilometres west of here, as we get out into drier country on the Darling Downs, I come to a little town of Pittsworth, and we planted 40 out there. And they're going fine, not a sign of any rust. They've flowered, they haven't fruited yet, but they take a lot of work to keep alive. And actually Jen Silcock's father was the main person who went out and watered them and kept them alive. And Al's just moved to Brisbane, so we need someone in Pittsworth to keep them going. And we can also grow them in gardens, and it's a really great opportunity for horticulturalists and gardeners to grow these really cute little plants, and with a little bit of touch up with some fungicide should be able to get them to flower and fruit in places like Brisbane. I'm the worst gardener in the world. This is my backyard, and they've grown quite a bit. I've managed to kill some and keep a few alive, and I do need to touch them up with fungicide every now and then, but I've kind of haven't been doing that recently just to see how they're going. And yeah, you learn a lot from growing plants, and you learn a lot about how much fungicide we need to apply and what the tricks are to get them ultimately to fruit. We can also do that in the wild. This is just one plant that I played with, spraying some fungicide along the track in a Brisbane park, and I got this Gossia hilii, a category X species, to throw out some fruit, and we grew some seedlings. This is Rhodamnia rubescens, which my elderly mother lives in Melbourne. I go down regularly and take her for a walk in a particular public garden, and I was wheeling mum around, and lo and behold, there was Rhodamnia rubescens in fruit. And yeah, Melbourne's sort of broadly out of the reach of the disease. Got the seeds, sent them back to my nurseryman mate, Spencer Shaw, who's one of the heroes of the story. And he is growing a bunch of seedlings, and ultimately we need to do a lot more of that, in my opinion, and try and find resistant genotypes within the pool. Thanks.